How much land did Europeans really discover? In 1492, Christopher Columbus led 3 ships on a journey from what is now Spain, venturing into the unknown expanse of the western Atlantic Ocean. After several months, they eventually reached an island in the Bahamas, proceeding to Cuba and Hispaniola. This marked the first known discovery of the Americas for the Spaniards and the beginning of the Age of Discovery. By the time Columbus set sail, other human populations had already extensively explored and discovered much of the significant lands. The Europeans were simply unaware of this knowledge. The Americas had been inhabited by millions of people for at least 15,000 years before Columbus arrived, and even within Europe, other explorers had reached the continent before him. The Scandinavian Vikings, for instance, had established colonies in Newfoundland, Canada, around 1021, almost 5 centuries prior to Columbus. Additionally, there is growing evidence that Polynesians had made contact with indigenous South Americans in the Pacific around 1200, nearly 3 centuries before Columbus's arrival. Everywhere the Europeans went, they encountered people who had already inhabited those regions for generations, descendants of the ancient explorers who had initially discovered the lands. Similarly, the Maori had inhabited New Zealand for over 400 years prior to its European discovery in 1642. While native Hawaiians had lived in Hawaii for nearly 800 years before the Europeans' arrival in 1778. In truth, the Europeans were relatively late in the game of global exploration, often encountering lands that had already been discovered by others. This raises the question of what the Europeans actually discovered that had not been previously explored for hundreds of years. The answer, while not as extensive as commonly believed, still encompasses a significant number of discoveries. Centuries before Columbus, a group of medieval Irish monks ventured from their homeland in the late 8th century and stumbled upon the previously unknown and uninhabited island of Iceland. They established a small settlement, which was later abandoned for unknown reasons. This occurred around the same period when Polynesians were discovering and settling in Hawaii. Nevertheless, many smaller discoveries occurred, with significant gaps between them. In the early 15th century, the Portuguese, driven by the desire to find a new maritime trade route to India, began exploring the unknown western and southern oceans. They were the first to discover the uninhabited Azores and Madeira Islands in the Atlantic, which remain part of Portugal to this day. Over the next centuries, the Portuguese made the majority of the initial geographic discoveries made by Europeans. Around 1456, the Portuguese were also the first to discover the uninhabited Cape Verde archipelago off the western coast of Africa and established the first European colony in the tropics there. Additionally, they discovered St. Paul Island, located farther south. However, nearby Amsterdam Island was initially sighted by Spanish explorers, the arch-rivals of Portugal. Spain focused primarily on discoveries in the Americas, including Bermuda and the Cayman Islands in the Caribbean, as well as a range of islands from Guadeloupe to the Galapagos to the Juan Fernandez Islands along the Pacific coast of the Americas. Spanish explorers also discovered the Bonin Islands and a few other currently uninhabited islands in the North Pacific while seeking a convenient route between the Philippines and Mexico, both of which were Spanish colonies at the time. The Dutch made only a handful of initial discoveries. The claim that Zabel de Weert, a Flemish captain in Dutch service, was the first European to spot the Falkland Islands is disputed by English and Spanish sources. However, there is less controversy surrounding the Dutch sailors' first sightings and visits to Jan Mayen and Spitsbergen, also known as Svalbard. The British primarily focused their discoveries in the southern hemisphere, including numerous islands near Antarctica such as South Georgia and the Heard and McDonald Islands. They also discovered islands near Australia and New Zealand, ranging from Cocos and Christmas Islands to Lord Howe, Norfolk, Bounty, and Antipodes Islands. French sailors discovered 3 desolate South Indian islands, namely Tromelin, which has a tragic history, as well as Clipperton Island in the Pacific. These islands are currently uninhabited, except for scientific expeditions that experience their extreme desolation and isolation firsthand. Russia's discoveries were concentrated in its northern regions, including the far north of Siberia, some islands near the North Pole, and a few islands in the North Pacific. The US found a few Pacific islands, notably Johnston Atoll, today mostly utilized as an airport in the middle of the ocean, and Wrangel Island, which is located north of Siberia. In 1881, an American ship landed on Wrangel Island and named it New Columbia, claiming it for the United States, although the claim did not endure. Even the land-based Austro-Hungarian Empire made some overseas discoveries, naming an Arctic archipelago after their emperor, Franz Joseph. These islands, currently under Russian control, house Russia's northernmost military base at Nagouzhskoye. In 1942, a German U-boat destroyed a Soviet weather station on the island, which remains its only significant historical event.